How to Stop Worrying and Start Living by Dale Carnegie. Part 1. Fundamental Facts You Should Know About Worry. Chapter 1. Live in Day-Tight Compartments. In the spring of 1871, a young man picked up a book and read 21 words that had a profound effect on his future. A medical student at the Montreal General Hospital, he was worried about passing the final examination, worried about what to do, where to go, how to build up a practice, how to make a living. The 21 words that this young medical student read in 1871 helped him to become the most famous physician of his generation. He organized the world-famous Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. He became Regius Professor of Medicine at Oxford, the highest honor that can be bestowed upon any medical man in the British Empire. He was knighted by the King of England. When he died, 2 huge volumes containing 1,466 pages were required to tell the story of his life. His name was Sir William Osler. Here are the 21 words that he read in the spring of 1871, 21 words from Thomas Carlyle that helped him lead a life free from worry. Our main business is not to see what lies dimly at a distance, but to do what lies clearly at hand. 42 years later, on a soft spring night when the tulips were blooming on the campus, this man, Sir William Osler, addressed the students of Yale University. He told those Yale students that a man like himself, who had been a professor in 4 universities and had written a popular book, was supposed to have brains of a special quality. He declared that this was untrue. He said that his intimate friends knew that his brains were of the most mediocre character. What then was the secret of his success? He stated that it was owing to what he called living in day-tight compartments. What did he mean by that? A few months before he spoke at Yale, Sir William Osler had crossed the Atlantic on a great ocean liner, where the captain, standing on the bridge, could press a button, and presto, there was a clanging of machinery, and various parts of the ship were immediately shut off from one another, shut off into watertight compartments. Now, each one of you, Dr. Osler said to these Yale students, is a much more marvelous organization than the great liner, and bound on a longer voyage. What I urge is that you so learn to control the machinery as to live with day-tight compartments as the most certain way to ensure safety on the voyage. Get on the bridge and see that at least the great bulkheads are in working order. Touch a button and hear at every level of your life the iron doors shutting out the past, the dread yesterdays. Touch another and shut off with a metal curtain the future, the unborn tomorrows. Then you are safe for today. Shut off the past. Let the dead past bury its dead. Shut out the yesterdays which have lighted fools the way to dusty death. The load of tomorrow added to that of yesterday, carried today, makes the strongest falter. Shut off the future as tightly as the past. The future is today. There is no tomorrow. The day of man's salvation is now. Waste of energy, mental distress, nervous worries dog the steps of a man who is anxious about the future. Shut close, then, the great fore and aft bulkheads, and prepare to cultivate the habit of a life of day-tight compartments. I know now that I can live one day at a time, and that every day is a new life to a wise man. Who do you suppose wrote this verse? Happy the man, and happy he alone, he who can call today his own, he who, secure within, can say, Tomorrow do thy worst, for I have lived today. Those words sound modern, don't they? Yet they were written 30 years before Christ was born by the Roman poet Horace. One of the most tragic things I know about human nature is that all of us tend to put off living. We're all dreaming of some magical rose garden over the horizon instead of enjoying the roses that are blooming outside our windows today. Why are we such fools, such tragic fools? "How strange it is, our little procession of life," wrote Stephen Leacock. The child says, "When I am a big boy," but what is that? The big boy says, "When I grow up." And then grown up, he says, "When I get married." But to be married, what is that after all? The thought changes to "when I'm able to retire." And then when retirement comes, he looks back over the landscape traversed. A cold wind seems to sweep over it. Somehow he has missed it all, and it is gone. Life, we learn too late, is in the living, in the tissue of every day and hour. Part 2. Basic Techniques in Analyzing Worry. Chapter 4. How to Analyze and Solve Worry Problems. I keep 6 honest serving men. They taught me all I knew. Their names are what and why and when and how and where and who. Rudyard Kipling. Will the magic formula of Willis H. Carrier, described in Part 1, Chapter 2, solve all worry problems? No, of course not. Then what is the answer? The answer is that we must equip ourselves to deal with different kinds of worries by learning the 3 basic steps of problem analysis. The 3 steps are: 1. Get the facts. 2. Analyze the facts. 3. Arrive at a decision, and then act on that decision. Obvious stuff, yes. Aristotle taught it and used it. And you and I must use it too, if we're going to solve the problems that are harassing us and turning our days and nights into veritable hells. Let's take the first rule. Get the facts. Why is it so important to get the facts? Because unless we have the facts, we can't possibly even attempt to solve our problems intelligently. Without the facts, all we can do is stew around in confusion. My idea? No, that was the idea of the late Herbert E. Hawks, Dean of Columbia College, Columbia University, for 22 years. He had helped 200,000 students solve their worry problems, and he told me that confusion is the chief cause of worry. He put it this way. He said, "Half the worry in the world is caused by people trying to make decisions before they have sufficient knowledge on which to base a decision. For example," he said, "if I have a problem which has to be faced at 3 o'clock next Tuesday, I refuse to even try to make a decision about it until next Tuesday arrives. In the meantime, I concentrate on getting all the facts that bear on the problem. I don't worry," he said. "I don't agonize over my problem. I don't lose any sleep. I simply concentrate on getting the facts. And by the time Tuesday rolls around, if I've got all the facts, the problem usually solves itself." I asked Dean Hawks if he meant he had licked worry entirely. "Yes," he said, "I think I can honestly say that my life is now almost totally devoid of worry. I've found," he went on, "that if a man will devote his time to securing facts in an impartial, objective way, his worries will usually evaporate in the light of knowledge." Let me repeat that. If a man will devote his time to securing facts in an impartial, objective way, his worries will usually evaporate in the light of knowledge. Here are 2 ideas that I've found helpful when trying to step aside from my problems in order to see the facts in a clear, objective manner. 1. When trying to get the facts, I pretend that I'm collecting this information not for myself, but for some other person. This helps me to take a cold, impartial view of the evidence. This helps me eliminate my emotions. 2. While trying to collect the facts about the problem that is worrying me, I sometimes pretend that I'm a lawyer preparing to argue the other side of the issue. In other words, I try to get all the facts against myself, all the facts that are damaging to my wishes, all the facts I don't like to face. Then I write down both my side of the case and the other side of the case, and I generally find that the truth lies somewhere in between these 2 extremities. Here's the point I'm trying to make. Neither you nor I nor Einstein nor the Supreme Court of the United States is brilliant enough to reach an intelligent decision on any problem without first getting the facts. Thomas Edison knew that. At the time of his death, he had 2,500 notebooks filled with facts about the problems he was facing. So Rule 1 for solving our problems is, get the facts. Let's do what Dean Hawks did. Let's not even attempt to solve our problems without first collecting all the facts in an impartial manner. However, getting all the facts in the world won't do us any good until we analyze them and interpret them. I have found from costly experience that it's much easier to analyze the facts after writing them down. In fact, merely writing the facts on a piece of paper and stating our problem clearly goes a long way toward helping us reach a sensible decision. As Charles Kettering puts it, a problem well stated is a problem half solved. For years, whenever I was worried, I had always gone to my typewriter and written down 2 questions, and the answer to these questions. 1. What am I worrying about? 2. What can I do about it? I used to try to answer those questions without writing them down, but I stopped that years ago. I found that writing down both the questions and the answers clarifies my thinking. So I banish about 90% of my worries by taking these 4 steps. 1. Writing down precisely what I am worrying about. 2. Writing down what I can do about it. 3. Deciding what to do. 4. Starting immediately to carry out that decision. Once you've made a careful decision based on facts, go into action. Don't stop to reconsider. Don't begin to hesitate, worry, and retrace your steps. Don't lose yourself in self-doubting, which begets other doubts. Don't keep looking back over your shoulder. Chapter 5. How to eliminate 50% of your business worries. If you're in business, you're probably saying to yourself right now, the title of this chapter is ridiculous. I've been running my business for 19 years, and I certainly know the answers, if anybody does. The idea of anybody trying to tell me how I can eliminate 50% of my business worries, it's absurd. Fair enough. I would have felt exactly the same way myself a few years ago if I'd seen this title on a chapter. It promises a lot, and promises are cheap. But let's be very frank about it. Maybe I won't be able to help you eliminate 50% of your business worries. In the last analysis, no one can do that except yourself. But what I can do is show you how other people have done it, and leave the rest up to you. You may recall that earlier in this book I quoted the world-famous Dr. Alexis Carrel as saying, "Those who do not know how to fight worry die young." Since worry is that serious, wouldn't you be satisfied if I could help you eliminate even 10% of your worries? Yes? Good. Well, I'm going to show you how one business executive eliminated not 50% of his worries, but 75% of all the time he formerly spent in conferences trying to solve business problems. Furthermore, I'm not going to tell you this story about a Mr. Jones or a Mr. X or a man I knew in Ohio, vague stories that you can't check up on. It concerns a very real person, Leon Shimkin, a former partner and general manager of one of the foremost publishing houses in these United States, Simon & Schuster, Rockefeller Center, New York. Here is Leon Shimkin's experience in his own words. For 15 years, I spent almost half of every business day holding conferences, discussing problems. Should we do this or that or nothing at all? We would get tense, twist in our chairs, walk the floor, argue, and go around in circles. When night came, I would be utterly exhausted. I fully expected to go on doing this sort of thing for the rest of my life. I'd been doing it for 15 years, and it never occurred to me that there was a better way of doing it. If anyone had told me that I could eliminate 3/4 of all the time I spent in these worried conferences and 3/4 of my nervous strain, I would have thought he was a wild-eyed, slap-happy armchair optimist. Yet I devised a plan that did just that. I've been using this plan for 8 years. It has performed wonders for my efficiency, my health, and my happiness. It sounds like magic, but like all magic tricks, it's extremely simple when you see how it's done. Here's the secret. First, I immediately stopped the procedure I had been using in my conferences for 15 years, a procedure that began with my troubled associates reciting all the details of what had gone wrong and ended up by asking, "What shall we do?" Second, I made a new rule. A rule that everyone who wishes to present a problem to me must first prepare and submit a memorandum answering these 4 questions. Question 1. What is the problem? In the old days, we used to spend an hour or two in a worried conference without anyone's knowing specifically and concretely what the real problem was. We used to work ourselves into a lather discussing our troubles without ever troubling to write out specifically what our problem was. Question 2. What is the cause of the problem? As I look back over my career, I'm appalled at the wasted hours I've spent in worried conferences without ever trying to find out clearly the conditions which lay at the root of the problem. Question 3. What are all the possible solutions of the problem? In the old days, one man in the conference would suggest one solution, someone else would argue with him, tempers would flare, we would often get clear off the subject, and at the end of the conference no one would have written down all the various things we could do to attack the problem. Question 4. What solution do you suggest? I used to go into a conference with a man who'd spent hours worrying about a situation and going around in circles without ever once thinking through all possible solutions and then writing down, "This is the solution I recommend." My associates rarely come to me now with their problems. Why? Because they've discovered that in order to answer those 4 questions, they have to get all the facts and think their problems through. And after they've done that, they find in 3/4 of the cases they don't have to consult me at all, because the proper solution has popped out like a piece of bread popping out from an electric toaster. Even in those cases where consultation is necessary, the discussion takes about 1/3 of the time formerly required, because it proceeds along an orderly, logical path to a reasoned conclusion. Part 3. How to break the worry habit before it breaks you. Chapter 6. How to crowd worry out of your mind. When men came out of battle, so shaken by the experience that they were called psychoneurotic, army doctors prescribed "keep 'em busy" as the cure. Every waking minute of these nerve-shocked men was filled with activity, usually outdoor activities such as fishing, hunting, playing ball, golf, taking pictures, making gardens, and dancing. They were given no time for brooding over their terrible experiences. Occupational therapy is the term now used by psychiatry when work is prescribed as though it were a medicine. It is not new. The old Greek physicians were advocating it 500 years before Christ was born. The Quakers were using it in Philadelphia in Ben Franklin's time. A man who visited a Quaker sanitarium in 1774 was shocked to see that the patients who were mentally ill were busy spinning flax. He thought these poor unfortunates were being exploited, until the Quakers explained that they found that their patients actually improved when they did a little work. It was soothing to the nerves. Any psychiatrist will tell you that work, keeping busy, is one of the best anesthetics ever known for sick nerves. Most of us have little trouble losing ourselves in action while we have our noses to the grindstone and are doing our day's work, but the hours after work, they are the dangerous ones. Just when we're free to enjoy our own leisure and ought to be the happiest, that's when the blue devils of worry attack us. That's when we begin to wonder whether we're getting anywhere in life, whether we're in a rut, whether the boss meant anything by that remark he made today, or whether we're losing our sex appeal. When we're not busy, our minds tend to become a near vacuum. Every student of physics knows that nature abhors a vacuum. The nearest thing to a vacuum that you and I will probably ever see is inside of an incandescent electric light bulb. Break that bulb, and nature forces air in to fill the theoretical empty space. Nature also rushes in to fill the vacant mind. With what? Usually with emotions. Why? Because emotions of worry, fear, hate, jealousy, and envy are driven by primeval vigor and the dynamic energy of the jungle. Such emotions are so violent that they tend to drive out of our minds all peaceful, happy thoughts and emotions. James L. Mersell, professor of education, Teachers College, Columbia, put it very well when he said, "Worry is most apt to ride you ragged not when you're in action, but when the day's work is done. Your imagination can run riot then and bring up all sorts of ridiculous possibilities and magnify each little blunder. At such a time, he continued, your mind is like a motor operating without its load. It races and threatens to burn out its bearings, or even to tear itself to bits. The remedy for worry is to get completely occupied doing something constructive. If you and I are worried, let's remember that we can use good old-fashioned work as a medicine. That was said by no less an authority than the late Dr. Richard C. Cabot, formerly professor of clinical medicine at Harvard. In his book, What Men Live By, Dr. Cabot says, as a physician, I have had the happiness of seeing work cure many persons who have suffered from trembling palsy of the soul, which results from overmastering doubts, hesitations, vacillation, and fear. Courage given us by our work is like the self-reliance which Emerson has made forever glorious. If you and I don't keep busy, if we sit around and brood, we will hatch out a whole flock of what Charles Darwin used to call the whibber-jibbers. And the whibber-jibbers are nothing but old-fashioned gremlins that will run us hollow and destroy our power of action and our power of will. George Bernard Shaw was right. He summed it all up when he said, the secret of being miserable is to have the leisure to bother about whether you are happy or not. So don't bother to think about it, spit on your hands, and get busy. Your blood will start circulating, your mind will start ticking, and pretty soon this whole positive upsurge of life in your body will drive worry from your mind. Get busy, keep busy. It's the cheapest kind of medicine there is on this earth, and one of the best. To break the worry habit, here is Rule 1. Keep busy. The worried person must lose himself in action, lest he wither in despair. Chapter 7. Don't let the Beatles get you down. We often face the major disasters of life bravely, and then let the trifles, the pains in the neck, get us down. Judge Joseph Sabath of Chicago, after acting as arbiter in more than 40,000 unhappy marriages, declared, trivialities are at the bottom of most marital unhappiness. And Frank S. Hogan, former district attorney of New York County, says, fully half the cases in our criminal courts originate in little things. Barroom bravado, domestic wrangling, an insulting remark, a disparaging word, a rude action, those are the little things that lead to assault and murder. Very few of us are cruelly and greatly wronged. It is the small blows to our self-esteem, the indignities, the little jolts to our vanity, which cause half the heartaches in the world. A well-known legal maxim says, de minimis non curat lex, the law does not concern itself with trifles, and neither should the worrier, if he wants peace of mind. Much of the time, all we need to overcome the annoyance of trifles is to effect a shifting of emphasis, set up a new and pleasurable point of view in the mind. And so it is with many petty worries. We dislike them and get into a stew, all because we exaggerate their importance. Disraeli said, life is too short to be little. Those words, said André Maurois in This Week magazine, have helped me through many a painful experience. Often we allow ourselves to be upset by small things we should despise and forget. Here we are on this earth with only a few more decades to live, and we lose many irreplaceable hours brooding over grievances that in a year's time will be forgotten by us and by everybody. No, let's devote our life to worthwhile actions and feelings, to great thoughts, real affections, and enduring undertakings, for life is too short to be little. Chapter 8. A law that will outlaw many of your worries. You and I could probably eliminate 9/10 of our worries right now if we would cease our fretting long enough to discover whether by the law of averages there was any real justification for our worries. The most famous insurance company on earth, Lloyd's of London, has made countless millions of dollars out of the tendency of everybody to worry about things that rarely happen. Lloyd's of London bets people that the disasters they're worrying about will never occur. However, they don't call it betting, they call it insurance. But it is really betting based on the law of averages. This great insurance firm has been going strong for over 200 years, and unless human nature changes, it will still be going strong 50 centuries from now by insuring shoes and ships and sealing wax against disasters that by the law of averages don't happen nearly so often as people imagine. If we examine the law of averages, we will often be astounded at the facts we uncover. The United States Navy used the statistics of the law of averages to buck up the morale of their men. One ex-sailor told me that when he and his shipmates were assigned to high-octane tankers, they were worried stiff. They all believed that if a tanker loaded with high-octane gasoline was hit by a torpedo, it exploded and blew everybody to kingdom come. But the U.S. Navy knew otherwise, so the Navy issued exact figures, showing that out of 100 tankers hit by torpedoes, 60 stayed afloat. And of the 40 that did sink, only 5 sank in less than 10 minutes. That meant time to get off the ship. It also meant casualties were exceedingly small. Did this help morale? This knowledge of the law of averages wiped out my jitters, said Clyde W. Moss of St. Paul, Minnesota, the man who told the story. The whole crew felt better. We knew we had a chance, and that by the law of averages we probably wouldn't be killed. To break the worry habit before it breaks you, here is Rule 3. Let's examine the record. Let's ask ourselves, what are the chances, according to the law of averages, that this event I am worrying about will ever occur? Chapter 9. Cooperate with the inevitable. It's astonishing how quickly we can accept almost any situation, if we have to, and adjust ourselves to it and forget about it. I often think of an inscription on the ruins of a 15th-century cathedral in Amsterdam, Holland. This inscription says in Flemish, "It is so. It cannot be otherwise." As you and I march across the decades of time, we're going to meet a lot of unpleasant situations that are so. They cannot be otherwise. We have our choice. We can either accept them as inevitable and adjust ourselves to them, or we can ruin our lives with rebellion and maybe end up with a nervous breakdown. Here's a bit of sage advice from one of my favorite philosophers, William James. "Be willing to have it so," he said. "Acceptance of what has happened is the first step to overcoming the consequences of any misfortune." We must accept and cooperate with the inevitable. It is so, it cannot be otherwise. That's not an easy lesson to learn. Even kings on their thrones have to keep reminding themselves of it. The late George V had these framed words hanging on the wall of his library at Buckingham Palace. "Teach me neither to cry for the moon nor over spilt milk." The same thought is expressed by Schopenhauer in this way: "A good supply of resignation is of the first importance in providing for the journey of life." Obviously, circumstances alone do not make us happy or unhappy. It is the way we react to circumstances that determines our feelings. Jesus said that the kingdom of heaven is within you. That is where the kingdom of hell is, too. We can all endure disaster and tragedy and triumph over them if we have to. We may not think we can, but we have surprisingly strong inner resources that will see us through if we will only make use of them. We are stronger than we think. I spent 12 years working with cattle, yet I never saw a Jersey cow running a temperature because the pasture was burning up from a lack of rain, or because of sleet and cold, or because her boyfriend was paying too much attention to another heifer. The animals confront night, storms, and hunger calmly, so they never have nervous breakdowns or stomach ulcers, and they never go insane. Am I advocating that we simply bow down to all the adversities that come our way? Not by a long shot. That's mere fatalism. As long as there's a chance we can save a situation, let's fight. But when common sense tells us that we're up against something that is so and cannot be otherwise, then in the name of our sanity, let's not look before and after and pine for what is not. The late Dean Hawkes of Columbia University told me that he had taken a Mother Goose rhyme as one of his mottos. For every ailment under the sun there is a remedy, or there is none. If there be one, try to find it. If there be none, never mind it. While writing this book, I interviewed a number of the leading business executives of America, and I was impressed by the fact that they cooperated with the inevitable and led lives singularly free from worry. If they hadn't done that, they would have cracked under the strain. When I'm up against a tough situation, if I can do anything about it, I do it. If I can't, I just forget it. I never worry about the future because I know no man living can possibly figure out what's going to happen in the future. There are so many forces that will affect the future. Nobody can tell what prompts these forces or understands them, so why worry about them? There is only one way to happiness, Epictetus taught the Romans, and that is to cease worrying about things which are beyond the power of our will. When we stop fighting the inevitable, said Elsie McCormick in a Reader's Digest article, we release energy which enables us to create a richer life. No one living has enough emotion and vigor to fight the inevitable, and at the same time enough left over to create a new life. Choose one or the other. You can either bend with the inevitable sleet storms of life, or you can resist them and break. What will happen to you and me if we resist the shocks of life instead of absorbing them? What will happen if we refuse to bend like the willow and insist on resisting like the oak? The answer is easy. We will set up a series of inner conflicts. We will be worried, tense, strained, and neurotic. If we go still further and reject the harsh world of reality and retreat into a dream world of our own making, we will then be insane. I've been reading practically every book and magazine article I could find that dealt even remotely with banishing worry. Would you like to know what the best single bit of advice about worry that I've discovered in all that reading? Well, here it is, summed up in 27 words. Words that you and I ought to paste on our bathroom mirror, so that each time we wash our faces, we could also wash away all worry from our minds. This priceless prayer was written by Dr. Reinhold Niebuhr. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. To break the worry habit before it breaks you, Rule 4 is, cooperate with the inevitable. Chapter 10. Put a stop-loss order on your worries. Would you like to know how to make money in Wall Street? Well, so would a million other people, and if I knew the answer, this book would sell for $10,000 a copy. However, there's one good idea that some successful operators use. If I buy a stock at, say, $50 a share, I immediately place a stop-loss order on it at $45. That means that when and if the stock should decline by as much as 5 points below its cost, it would be sold automatically, thereby limiting the loss to 5 points. I began to place a stop-loss order on any and every kind of annoyance and resentment that came to me. It has worked like magic. For example, I often have a luncheon date with a friend who's rarely on time. In the old days, he used to keep me stewing around for half my lunch hours before he showed up. Finally, I told him about my stop-loss orders on my worries. I said, "Bill, my stop-loss order on waiting for you is exactly 10 minutes. If you arrive more than 10 minutes late, our luncheon engagement will be sold down the river and I'll be gone." Man alive, how I wish I had the sense years ago to put stop-loss orders on my impatience, on my temper, on my desire for self-justification, on my regrets, and on all my mental and emotional strains. Why didn't I have the horse sense to size up each situation that threatened to destroy my peace of mind and say to myself, "See here, Dale Carnegie, this situation is worth just so much fussing about and no more." Why didn't I put a stop-loss order on every market commitment I make? So, to break the worry habit before it breaks you, here is Rule 5. Whenever we are tempted to throw good money after bad in terms of human living, let's stop and ask ourselves these 3 questions. 1. How much does this thing I am worrying about really matter to me? 2. At what point shall I set a stop-loss order on this worry and forget it? 3. Exactly how much shall I pay for this whistle? Have I already paid more than it is worth? Chapter 11. Don't try to saw sawdust. How I wish I had had the privilege of attending the George Washington High School here in New York and studying under Dr. Paul Brandwine, the same teacher who taught Alan Saunders of New York. Mr. Saunders told me that the teacher of his hygiene class, Dr. Paul Brandwine, taught him one of the most valuable lessons he had ever learned. "I was only in my teens," said Alan Saunders as he told me the story, "but I was a worrier even then. I used to stew and fret about the mistakes I had made. If I turned in an examination paper, I used to lie awake and chew my fingernails for fear I hadn't passed. I was always living over the things I had done and wishing I had done them differently, thinking over the things I had said and wishing I'd said them better. Then one morning our class filed into the science laboratory, and there was the teacher, Dr. Paul Brandwine, with a bottle prominently displayed on the edge of the desk. We all sat down, staring at the milk and wondering what it had to do with the hygiene course he was teaching. Then, all of a sudden, Dr. Paul Brandwine stood up, swept the bottle of milk with a crash into the sink, and shouted, "Don't cry over spilt milk." He then made us all come to the sink and look at the wreckage. "Take a good look," he told us, "because I want you to remember this lesson the rest of your lives. That milk is gone. You can see it down the drain, and all the fussing and hair-pulling in the world won't bring back a drop of it. With a little thought and prevention, that milk might have been saved, but it's too late now. All we can do is write it off, forget it, and go on to the next thing." Some readers are going to snort at the idea of making so much over a hackneyed proverb like "don't cry over spilt milk." I know it's trite, commonplace, and a platitude. I know you've heard it 1,000 times, but I also know that these hackneyed proverbs contain the very essence of the distilled wisdom of all ages. They have come out of the fiery experience of the human race, and have been handed down through countless generations. If you were to read everything that has ever been written about worry by the greatest scholars of all time, you would never read anything more basic or more profound than such hackneyed proverbs as "don't cross your bridges till you come to them," and "don't cry over spilt milk." If we only applied those two proverbs instead of snorting at them, we wouldn't need this book at all. In fact, if we applied most of the old proverbs, we would lead almost perfect lives. However, knowledge isn't power until it's applied, and the purpose of this book is not to tell you something new. The purpose of this book is to remind you of what you already know, and to kick you in the shins and inspire you to do something about applying it. I have always admired a man like the late Fred Fuller Shedd, who had a gift for stating an old truth in a new and picturesque way. While editor of the Philadelphia Bulletin and addressing a college graduating class, he asked, "How many of you have ever sawed wood? Let's see your hands." Most of them had. Then he inquired, "How many of you have ever sawed sawdust?" No hands went up. "Of course you can't saw sawdust," Mr. Shedd exclaimed. "It's already sawed, and it's the same with the past. When you start worrying about things that are over and done with, you're merely trying to saw sawdust." Part 3 in a nutshell. How to break the worry habit before it breaks you. Rule 1. Crowd worry out of your mind by keeping busy. Plenty of action is one of the best therapies ever devised for curing whibber-jibbers. Rule 2. Don't fuss about trifles. Don't permit little things, the mere termites of life, to ruin your happiness. Rule 3. Use the law of averages to outlaw your worries. Ask yourself, what are the odds against this thing's happening at all? Rule 4. Cooperate with the inevitable. If you know a circumstance is beyond your power to change or revise, say to yourself, "It is so. It cannot be otherwise." Rule 5. Put a stop-loss order on your worries. Decide just how much anxiety a thing may be worth, and refuse to give it any more. Rule 6. Let the past bury its dead. Don't saw sawdust. Part 4. 7 ways to cultivate a mental attitude that will bring you peace and happiness. Chapter 12. 8 words that can transform your life. A few years ago, I was asked to answer this question on a radio program. What is the biggest lesson you have ever learned? That was easy. By far the most vital lesson I have ever learned is the importance of what we think. If I knew what you think, I would know what you are. Our thoughts make us what we are. Our mental attitude is the X factor that determines our fate. Emerson said, "A man is what he thinks about all day long." How could he possibly be anything else? I now know with a conviction beyond all doubt that the biggest problem you and I have to deal with, in fact almost the only problem we have to deal with, is choosing the right thoughts. If we can do that, we will be on the high road to solving all our problems. The great philosopher who ruled the Roman Empire, Marcus Aurelius, summed it up in 8 words that can determine your destiny. Our life is what our thoughts make it. Yes, if we think happy thoughts, we will be happy. If we think miserable thoughts, we will be miserable. If we think fear thoughts, we will be fearful. If we think sickly thoughts, we will probably be ill. If we think failure, we will certainly fail. If we wallow in self-pity, everyone will want to shun us and avoid us. "You are not," said Norman Vincent Peale, "you are not what you think you are, but what you think you are." Am I advocating an habitual Pollyanna attitude toward all our problems? No, unfortunately life isn't so simple as all that. But I am advocating that we assume a positive attitude instead of a negative attitude. In other words, we need to be concerned about our problems, but not worried. What is the difference between concern and worry? Let me illustrate. Every time I cross the traffic-jammed streets of New York, I'm concerned about what I'm doing, but not worried. Concern means realizing what the problems are and calmly taking steps to meet them. Worrying means going around in maddening, futile circles. A man can be concerned about his serious problems and still walk with his chin up and a carnation in his buttonhole. Our mental attitude has an almost unbelievable effect even on our physical powers. The famous British psychiatrist J.A. Hadfield gives a striking illustration of that fact in his splendid 54-page booklet, The Psychology of Power. "I asked 3 men," he writes, "to submit themselves to test the effect of mental suggestion on their strength, which was measured by gripping a dynamometer. He told them to grip the dynamometer with all their might. He had them do this under 3 different sets of conditions. When he tested them under normal waking conditions, their average grip was 101 pounds. When he tested them after he had hypnotized them and told them that they were very weak, they could grip only 29 pounds, less than a third of their normal strength. One of these men was a prize fighter, and when he was told under hypnosis that he was weak, he remarked that his arm felt tiny, just like a baby's. When Captain Hadfield then tested these men a 3rd time, telling them under hypnosis that they were very strong, they were able to grip an average of 142 pounds. When their minds were filled with positive thoughts of strength, they increased their actual physical powers almost 50%. Such is the incredible power of our mental attitude. As a result of many years spent in teaching adults, I know men and women can banish worry, fear, and various kinds of illnesses, and can transform their lives by changing their thoughts. I know. I have seen such incredible transformations performed hundreds of times. I have seen them so often that I no longer wonder at them. For example, one of these incredible transformations, which illustrate the power of thought, happened to one of my students. He had a nervous breakdown. What brought it on? A worry. This student told me, "I worried about everything. I worried because I was too thin, because I thought I was losing my hair, because I feared I would never make enough money to get married, because I felt I would never make a good father, because I feared I was losing the girl I wanted to marry, because I felt I was not living a good life. I worried about the impression I was making on other people. I worried because I thought I had stomach ulcers. I could no longer work. I gave up my job. I built up tension inside me until I was like a boiler without a safety valve. The pressure got so unbearable that something had to give. And it did. If you have ever had a nervous breakdown, pray God that you never do, for no pain of the body can exceed the excruciating pain of an agonized mind. My breakdown was so severe that I couldn't talk, even to my own family. I had no control over my thoughts. I was filled with fear. I would jump at the slightest noise. I avoided everybody. I would break out crying for no apparent reason at all. Every day was one of agony. I felt that I was deserted by everybody, even God. I was tempted to jump into the river and end it all. I decided instead to take a trip to Florida, hoping that a change of scene would help me. As I stepped on the train, my father handed me a letter and told me not to open it until I reached Florida. I landed in Florida during the height of the tourist season. Since I couldn't get in a hotel, I rented a sleeping room in a garage. I tried to get a job on a tramp freighter out of Miami, but had no luck, so I spent my time on the beach. I was more wretched in Florida than I had been at home, so I opened the envelope to see what Dad had written. His note said, "Son, you are 1,500 miles from home, and you don't feel any different, do you? I knew you wouldn't, because you took with you the one thing that is the cause of all your trouble, that is, yourself. There is nothing wrong with either your body or your mind. It is not the situations you have met that have thrown you. It is what you think of these situations. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. When you realize that, son, come home, for you will be cured." Dad's letter made me angry. I was looking for sympathy, not instruction. I was so mad that I decided then and there that I would never go home. That night, as I was walking down one of the side streets of Miami, I came to a church where services were going on. Having no place to go, I drifted in and listened to the sermon on the text, "He who conquers his spirit is mightier than he who taketh a city." Sitting in the sanctity of the house of God, and hearing the same thoughts that my dad had written in his letter, all this swept the accumulated litter out of my brain. I was able to think clearly and sensibly for the first time in my life. I realized what a fool I had been. I was shocked to see myself in my true light. Here I was, wanting to change the whole world and everyone in it, when the only thing that needed changing was the focus of the lens of the camera, which was my mind. The next morning, I packed and started home. A week later, I was back on the job. 4 months later, I married the girl I had been afraid of losing. We now have a happy family of 5 children. God has been good to me, both materially and mentally. I found out the hard way what power our thoughts can have over our mind and body. Now I can make my thoughts work for me instead of against me. I can see now that Dad was right when he said it wasn't outward situations that had caused all my suffering, but what I thought of those situations. And as soon as I realized that, I was cured, and stayed cured. I'm deeply convinced that our peace of mind, and the joy we get out of living, depends not on where we are, or what we have, or who we are, but solely upon our mental attitude. Outward conditions have very little to do with it. Years ago, I read a little book that had a lasting and profound effect on my life. It was called As a Man Thinketh, by James Allen. And here's what it said. A man will find that as he alters his thoughts toward things and other people will alter towards him. Let a man radically alter his thoughts, and he will be astonished at the rapid transformation it will effect in the material conditions of his life. Men do not attract that which they want, but that which they are. The divinity that shapes our ends is in ourselves. It is our very self. All that a man achieves is the direct result of his own thoughts. A man can only rise, conquer, and achieve by lifting up his thoughts. He can only remain weak and abject and miserable by refusing to lift up his thoughts. According to the book of Genesis, the Creator gave man dominion over the whole wide earth, a mighty big present. But I'm not interested in any such super-royal prerogatives. All I desire is dominion over myself, dominion over my thoughts, dominion over my fears, dominion over my mind and over my spirit. And the wonderful thing is that I know I can attain this dominion to an astonishing degree any time I want to, by merely controlling my actions, which in turn control my reactions. So let us remember these words of William James. Much of what we call evil can often be converted into a bracing and tonic good by a simple change of the sufferer's inner attitude, from one of fear to one of fight. Let's fight for our happiness. Let's fight for our happiness by following a daily program of cheerful and constructive thinking. Here is such a program. It is entitled Just for Today. I found this program so inspiring that I gave away hundreds of copies. It was written by the late Sybil F. Partridge. If you and I follow it, we will eliminate most of our worries and increase immeasurably our portion of what the French call la joie de vivre. Just for today. 1. Just for today, I will be happy. This assumes that what Abraham Lincoln said is true, that most folks are about as happy as they make up their minds to be. Happiness is from within. It is not a matter of externals. 2. Just for today, I will try to adjust myself to what is, and not try to adjust everything to my own desires. I will take my family, my business, and my luck as they come, and fit myself to them. 3. Just for today, I will take care of my body. I will exercise it, care for it, nourish it, not abuse it nor neglect it, so that it will be a perfect machine for my bidding. 4. Just for today, I will try to strengthen my mind. I will learn something useful. I will not be a mental loafer. I will read something that requires effort, thought, and concentration. 5. Just for today, I will exercise my soul in 3 ways. I will do somebody a good turn and not get found out. I will do at least 2 things I don't want to do, as William James suggests, just for exercise. 6. Just for today, I will be agreeable. I will look as well as I can, dress as becomingly as possible, talk low, act courteously, be liberal with praise, criticize not at all, nor find fault with anything, and not try to regulate nor improve anyone. 7. Just for today, I will try to live through this day only, not to tackle my whole life problem at once. I can do things for 12 hours that would appall me if I had to keep them up for a lifetime. 8. Just for today, I will have a program. I will write down what I expect to do every hour. I may not follow it exactly, but I will have it. It will eliminate 2 pests, hurrying and indecision. 9. Just for today, I will have a quiet half-hour all by myself and relax. In this half-hour, sometimes I will think of God, so as to get a little more perspective into my life. 10. Just for today, I will be unafraid. Especially, I will not be afraid to be happy, to enjoy what is beautiful, to love, and to believe that those I love me. If we want to develop a mental attitude that will bring us peace and happiness, here is Rule 1. Think and act cheerfully, and you will feel cheerful. Chapter 13. The High Cost of Getting Even. When we hate our enemies, we're giving them power over us, power over our sleep, our appetites, our blood pressure, our health, and our happiness. Our enemies would dance with joy if only they knew how they were worrying us, lacerating us, and getting even with us. Our hate is not hurting them at all, but our hate is turning our own days and nights into a hellish turmoil. Who do you suppose said this? If selfish people try to take advantage of you, cross them off your list, but don't try to get even. When you try to get even, you hurt yourself more than you hurt the other fellow. Now, those words sound as if they might have been uttered by some starry-eyed idealist, but they weren't. Those words appeared in the bulletin issued by the Police Department of Milwaukee. How will trying to get even hurt you? In many ways. According to Life magazine, it may even wreck your health. The chief personality characteristic of persons with hypertension, high blood pressure, is resentment, said Life. When resentment is chronic, chronic hypertension and heart trouble follow. So you see that when Jesus said, "Love your enemies," he was not only preaching sound ethics, he was also preaching 20th century medicine. When he said, "Forgive 70 times 7, Jesus was telling you and me how to keep from having high blood pressure, heart trouble, stomach ulcers, and many other ailments. Hatred destroys our ability to enjoy even our food. The Bible puts it this way: "Better is a dinner of herbs where love is, than a stalled ox and hatred therewith." Wouldn't our enemies rub their hands with glee if they knew that our hate for them was exhausting us, making us tired and nervous, ruining our looks, giving us heart trouble, and probably shortening our lives? Even if we can't love our enemies, let's at least love ourselves. Let's love ourselves so much that we won't permit our enemies to control our happiness, our health, and our looks. As Shakespeare put it, "Heat not a furnace for your foe so hot that it do singe yourself." We may not be saintly enough to love our enemies, but for the sake of our own health and happiness, let's at least forgive them and forget them. That is the smart thing to do. To be wronged or robbed, said Confucius, is nothing unless you continue to remember it. I once asked General Eisenhower's son John if his father ever nourished resentments. "No," he replied, "Dad never wastes a minute thinking about people he doesn't like." There's an old saying that a man is a fool who can't be angry, but a man is wise who won't be angry. I once asked Bernard Baruch, the man who was the trusted advisor to 6 presidents, Wilson, Harding, Coolidge, Hoover, Roosevelt, and Truman, whether he was ever disturbed by the attacks of his enemies. "No man can humiliate me or disturb me," he replied. "I won't let him." No one can humiliate or disturb you and me either, unless we let him. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me. I realize that patriotism is not enough. I must have no hatred or bitterness toward anyone. One sure way to forgive and forget our enemies is to become absorbed in some cause infinitely bigger than ourselves. Then the insults and the enmities we encounter won't matter, because we will be oblivious of everything but our cause. If you and I had inherited the same physical, mental, and emotional characteristics that our enemies have inherited, and if life had done to us what it has done to them, we would act exactly as they do. We couldn't possibly do anything else. Let's be charitable enough to repeat the prayer of the Sioux Indians. "O Great Spirit, keep me from ever judging and criticizing a man until I have walked in his moccasins for 2 weeks." So, instead of hating our enemies, let's pity them and thank God that life has not made us what they are. Instead of heaping condemnation and revenge upon our enemies, let us give them our understanding, our sympathy, our help, our forgiveness, and our prayers. To cultivate a mental attitude that will bring you peace and happiness, remember that Rule 2 is, let's never try to get even with our enemies, because if we do, we will hurt ourselves far more than we hurt them. Let's do as General Eisenhower does. Let's never waste a minute thinking about people we don't like. Chapter 14. If you do this, you will never worry about ingratitude.